Starting us off at number 10 is Julia Johnson. Back in April of 1925, at around 2 p.m. in the afternoon, 5-year-old Julia Johnson was seen by the blacksmith across the street playing alone outside her house in Winnipeg. At 3:50 p.m, Julia's neighbor Pauline Krall had a conversation with her, and that was the last time anyone saw or spoke to Julia. 5 minutes after the conversation, Pauline's son came home and told his mum that Julia's mum was looking for her, and within 20 minutes a search party was sent out looking for the child. Julia was a shy girl that wouldn't venture far from home for no reason. The adults had no clue how she could have disappeared within that 5-minute window. Extensive searches were underway, but Julia was never found. 9 years later, when a building near the family home was being repurposed, a machinist was dismantling a boiler in the basement. Inside the boiler, he found the mummified body of Julia Johnson. There was no evidence left, none to the point the coroner had no idea whether it was a murder or just an accident. Police then tried to think of who would have had access to the building at that time, and building manager John Goodwin claimed he left the key at the blacksmith's shop, but both blacksmiths denied this. Someone was lying, we just don't know who it was. Was it John Goodwin or was it the blacksmiths?
Coming into number 9, we have Who Shot Tupac? But like, who? Tupac Shakur was one of the most famous rappers in the world when he was killed in Las Vegas in September 1996, nearly 23 years ago to the day. He was just 25 years old when he was gunned down in Vegas, having seen Mike Tyson and Frank Bruno fight, which must have been epic. As Tupac and his entourage stopped at a red light in the Flamenco Road and Koval Lane area, he was shot 4 times. He died 6 days later and was not in a state to identify his killer. Earlier that night, it was reported that the rapper had beef with the street gang, the Crips. They could have had something to do with it, we'll just never know. A witness came forward, but then they were murdered in New Jersey, thousands of miles away, before they could even submit to further police questioning and identify a suspect. Of course, there are people out there that still believe Tupac is alive and living under a new identity. Perhaps we'll never know. Coming into number 8, we have the children of Hamlin. So you guys may have heard of the Pied Piper, a little fairy tale with a pretty key moral at the end of it. Pay your bills, if not a bohemian musician will steal your kids. Right? Well, it turns out that there is more than just a lesson to this story. There is actually an 800-year-old unsolved mystery. You see, the Pied Piper of Hamlin was actually a real man, a piper dressed in exuberant clothing who turned up in Lower Saxony in the village of Saxon itself in 1284. According to church records, he did steal 130 children from the town who were never seen or heard from again. They were simply spirited away. But were they? We just don't know. Coming into number 7, we have Stonehenge. We're taking it back to my home country of England, but what is going on? What's going on with Stonehenge? I don't know. Stonehenge sits pretty in the Salisbury Plains in England and was laid out around 4,000 years ago at a time where transporting and lifting 50-ton sarsen sandstone and bluestone rocks was legitimately beyond human capability. Aside from the mystery of how it was built, we also don't know what it was used for. The main theory is that it was for some kind of religious worship, although there were far more cosmic suggestions. The structure is aligned with various celestial objects and has been the focus of pagan celebration, especially around the summer solstice. Archaeological digs have also suggested that a breed of giant cows were used either to assist in the construction or, were just chilling there, present, mooing. Cows are just so great. Does anyone ever just stop and think about cows? I love cows, even ancient giant cows. Cows! Moo. Recently discovered underneath the stone structure were 17 further mysterious ancient monuments, which just adds more mystery to the pile of mystery. It's a mystery sundae with a side of mystery and a mystery cherry on top. Coming in at number 6, we have the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most elusive serial killers in modern American history. The mystery male murdered at least 5 people, but claims to be behind the deaths of up to 37 people. Despite no arrests, the California Department of Justice has maintained an open case file on the Zodiac murders since 1969. The Zodiac Killer murdered 3 women and 1 man, with 2 other male victims surviving. The killer claimed to have killed many people in the infamous ciphers, which were sent to the police. The Zodiac Killer was given their name as a result of the cryptograms sent to the police, which were a mystery unto themselves. One of those has definitely been solved, but the others not so much. The last known Zodiac murder was in the 1970s, so in theory the killer could be dead, or they could be living out their days among us, which is terrifying. So yeah, despite descriptions of the male killer at the time and many sketches of him, the case is unsolved and the murderer is, or was, at large. This is so mysterious. At number 5, we have the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Who was the Phantom Slayer? Honestly, we don't know. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders were a series of very grisly killings that took place in Texas in the spring of 1946. 8 people were attacked over 10 weeks, with 5 of the victims succumbing to their injuries. A pair of survivors claimed that the killer was wearing a white pillowcase with eye holes cut out over his head. What a ghoul. All of the attacks happened to couples and took place on weekends. The murders sent the town of Texarkana into absolute panic, as I'm sure you can imagine. City inhabitants locked themselves indoors with guns, and it was kinda like scenes from The Purge out there. The Texas Rangers were even called in, and people started arming up and taking to the streets to try and catch the killer, but the assailant never struck again. At the time, the Texas Ranger captain saw that the criminal killer was, and I quote, a shrewd criminal who left no stone unturned to conceal his identity and activities. He was never caught. Coming into number 4, we have the dark deaths of Overtoun Bridge. I've never heard of a dog taking their own life until now, but it seems that there's a bridge in Dumbarton in beautiful, beautiful Scotland which is A, haunted, and B, has claimed the lives of many dogs. This makes me feel really sad. It seems that since the 1960s, nearly 100 dogs have leapt to their death from the bridge, falling 50 feet into jagged rock below. Why the dogs have jumped? We just don't know. Reportedly, they freak out and they leap. The Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals has sent teams to investigate, but nobody has yet solved the mystery. While the dog deaths are the main issue, it seems that a man inexplicably threw his baby from the bridge in 1994. Now dogs are firmly required to be on leashes. Coming into number 3, we have the Phoenix Lights. What was going on in the skies of Arizona, Nevada, and Sonora? In 1997, thousands of people saw what they thought were UFOs in the sky between 7:30 and 10 p.m. at night. Thousands of people reported triangular formations of lights passing over the southern states and in North Mexico. A sizable number of people also reported actually seeing a UFO. One witness, who didn't want to be named, which I kind of understand, said, "It was totally silent. I've never seen anything close to the colors from the exhaust that propelled that thing. It was as big as downtown Prescott and completely blocked out the stars." Now, the shared phenomenon actually had a lot of credible witnesses, including the Arizona Governor Fife Symington. While the original event happened 22 years ago, possible reoccurrences have happened in 2007 and 2008. Coming into number 2, we have the case of D.B. Cooper. On November the 24th, 1971, the eve of Thanksgiving, a man using the name Dan Cooper successfully hijacked a Boeing 727 plane in the airspace between Portland and Seattle. The man boarded the plane as a passenger and ordered a bourbon and soda. After takeoff, he handed a note to a flight attendant, but she didn't read it, assuming it was his phone number. Creepy. He then leant over to her and said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Not what you want to hear. Long story short, he demanded and successfully extorted $200,000 in ransom, over $1 million in today's currency. He then parachuted out of the plane, jettisoned, gone. Nobody knew whether he landed alive or where he was at all. There was an extensive manhunt from the FBI, but the man's real identity has never been solved. Numerous theories were circulated. The serial number on the cash he stole were also released and searched for, but again, no trace was found. As of 2016, the investigation has been suspended and remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. Finally, coming into number 1, a mystery of our age, we have the disappearance of flight MH370. Malaysian Airlines 370 disappeared on March the 8th, 2014, flying from Kuala Lumpur Airport to Beijing in China. The aircraft last made contact with air traffic control when it was over the South China Sea, less than an hour after takeoff, before then completely disappearing from their radar. The last words from Captain Shah were, "Good night, Malaysian 370. The plane was still tracked on military radar, which suggested that actually it deviated to cross the Malay Peninsula, until finally disappearing from radar altogether over the Andaman Sea. Oddly, no phone calls of distress or signals were sent out or anything like that. No word. Silence. The black box could have shed light on what happened, but it was never found. Neither was the plane or its wreckage, despite millions of dollars being spent on finding it. So what happened? Alien abduction? ISIS abduction? It simply disappeared into a parallel universe? We just don't know.
Number 10. Crashed car. 20 years ago, a man named William went missing in the state of Florida after visiting a nightclub, with seemingly no trace left behind and no way to find where he went. But 2 decades later, someone was on Google Maps when they noticed something strange in a pond. The man was surveying for bus routes for his work when he saw what appeared to be a submerged car near the edge of the water. He called his ex-girlfriend to take a look and see if there was a car in the pond, but she couldn't see anything due to the murky water, so she contacted her neighbor. The neighbor flew his drone over the water and confirmed there was a car, contacting the authorities. They were able to remove the vehicle and did find human remains inside, later identifying them as the body of William. He had apparently lost control of his car, but due to no one living in the area at the time, it went unnoticed for 2 decades, the dirty water keeping his car hidden for years. Number 9. Stolen bicycle. In 2008, a man was riding his bicycle through Holland when he was approached by 2 men who stole his phone, money, and his bicycle. Due to the lack of any leads in the case, the police were unable to help him with recovering his stolen things, until 6 months later. He was looking through Google Street View at the exact place where the event had taken place, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Street View car had passed by and taken a photo mere seconds before the crime happened. The view shows the man on his bicycle and the 2 men right behind him preparing their attack. Thanks to this, he was able to take the evidence to the police, who easily recognized the 2 men as brothers who were well known by the justice system and had committed crimes before. Number 8. The Dock. You may recognize this image as it went viral on social media when it was discovered and posted to the website Reddit. It shows a dock in Holland which appears to have a blood trail that leads to somebody's body. The user posted it saying that someone had been killed by their house, and this was photographic evidence of it. People were in a panic trying to solve the mystery and figure out who the person was and how this event had come to pass. Fortunately, however, some other people took the time to look further into the image and really look at the details of what was going on. It was revealed that the 2 figures at the end of the dock were not a criminal and a body, but instead just a man and his dog. What many thought was a blood trail was actually just the result of the dog having gone for a swim in the water and then trailing the moisture down the dock as he walked, the color just being the color of the wood when it gets wet. Number 7. Stolen car. Now for another case of the Google Street View car being in the right place at the right time. A man named David had his car stolen right out of his driveway, and he probably felt like the unluckiest guy on earth because he had just bought this new car after his first one had been destroyed by a joyrider. But in actuality, he was pretty lucky. His son decided to look up their home on Google Street View, something I'm sure we all did at some point when we were younger, and when he looked at the driveway, he realized that the Google car had actually managed to catch the thief in the act of stealing the van, with a full view of his face and what he was doing. The police believed that the camera had managed to catch the man just moments before he drove off. After convincing Google to unblur the license plate so they could confirm the evidence, they were able to make an arrest on the crime 2 years after it had taken place. Number 6. Swiss farm. When you think of Switzerland, you probably imagine snowy mountains and alpine skiing resorts, and you probably don't picture people running around on beautiful green farms. But they are there, and one particular one was growing a lot of corn when they were found out for growing something else. I don't think I can say exactly what they were growing, but I think you get what I'm expressing here. Anyways, they were hiding this other farm behind rows and rows of corn to keep it hidden from view. Unfortunately, they probably hadn't considered Google Earth managing to snap a picture of it from above, revealing to the police their illegal side hustle. The discovery led to the arrest of 16 different farmers and the confiscation of over a ton of grass. The police admitted that they hadn't actually been searching for what they found and called it a chance discovery. Number 5. Robbery. In 2011, a woman had her home broken into in Oklahoma City. The robbers had weapons and prevented her from interfering while they ransacked the home, the whole event taking place in broad daylight. She said that the whole thing lasted for over an hour and she was devastated and terrified. More so when the police told her that there was no forensic evidence or other leads that they could follow up on to identify the criminals and bring them to justice. So if it all took place inside the home, how did Google Earth manage to catch what was going on? Well, 3 years later in 2014, a friend was looking at the home on Google Street View when she saw a picture of two men walking down the street just outside the home. The men matched the description that the woman had given of the robbers, and with this evidence, the police were able to launch an appeal to get the case reopened and subsequently solved. Number 4. Tax dodging. During the 2000s, an Italian businessman attempted to carry out a tax evasion scheme, and he would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you meddling kids. The finance police discovered that the man had sold a villa in 2002, which was noted as having a specifically phallic-shaped pool. With this clue, they took to Google Earth to find the property and were quickly able to. It became clear when they saw the aerial view that the property was clearly worth much more, especially when compared to similar properties in the area. This then led to them checking into all of the man's dealings, including his bank account checks. These checks revealed various different omissions, which totaled to around 7 million euros of dodged taxes. I picked this one specifically because I think it's incredibly topical, with Shakira's hips recently being found out for lying about paying taxes as well. Number 3. 9 years. William wasn't the only case to be solved thanks to overhead imagery of a submerged car in a lake. In 2006, a 72-year-old man named David Niles walked out of his favorite bar in Michigan and was never seen again. A decade passed and no one had any clue where he went, his family eventually giving up any hopes of finding him. Almost 10 years later, a man was decorating his Christmas tree when he thought he saw something deep in the lake across the road. He took a look on Google Earth and it revealed the distinct shape of a car in the water, very similar to the image that revealed William's whereabouts. Cops were able to pull the car out and the remains of David were found inside, identified by his wallet. His son-in-law said, "For us today, it's a closure of a long search. Why God waited 9 years, I have no idea, but we're happy. It's good to have him home." Number 2. Blood Lake. In 2007, people who spent their time looking around on Google Earth discovered something that they felt was pretty startling. It's a lake in Iraq that is estimated to be 500 feet wide and around a half a mile long, and it's bright red. People immediately started speculating that this is from some sort of terrible crime, and it's a lake that has managed to be stained red by blood. Others suggesting that the color came about due to a butchery using it as a dumping ground. Innocent theories were that of a specific type of algae or pollution and chemicals changing the color of the water. Unfortunately, we will never actually know what caused the color, as if you look at the lake now, it's back to normal. I know this doesn't really count as a solved mystery, but maybe you know why it was red and you can let me know in the comments and you can be the one who solved it. Number 1. Secret swimming pools. While the majority of things on my list today have been individual crimes reports, let me tell you about something that was discovered that was much more widespread. You may not know this, but in Athens, Greece, you need a special permit to be allowed to build a swimming pool on your land. And who the heck wants to pay for that? Reports show that there were only 324 pools in Athens, which investigators thought was just way too low a number. So financial crime investigators took to Google Earth to try and figure out the truth about what was going on. Within a few months, they had used the application to discover over 16,000 hidden and undeclared swimming pools on people's properties. The Greek government was cracking down on fraud at the time, and by tracking down the homeowners and collecting that pool tax, they were able to make a lot of cash. So if you're planning on hiding a swimming pool in Greece anytime soon, maybe consider a camouflage cover.
Coming into number 10, we have Where is Cynthia? This is a very bizarre missing persons case that was also featured on US TV show Unsolved Mysteries. Cynthia Anderson was a legal secretary from Ohio in 1980. The 20-year-old loved crime and romance novels, but began having a reoccurring dream that an intruder entered her home. She told her mother about it, but she didn't think too much of it until she started receiving weird phone calls at work. Her employers even went as far as to have an emergency buzzer installed on her desk. On the morning of August 4th, 1981, she wasn't at work, but her car was in the car park. On her desk was a novel that she was reading, but the page was open on a passage that detailed an abduction. A month later, the local police started getting weird calls saying that Cynthia was being held in a basement, but wouldn't give any further detail. To this day, she's never been found, and that case is cold.
Coming in at number 9 is the Highway of Tears. This entire mystery revolves around 725 kilometers of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia. From 1970 till now, there have been a string of murders at this location, and its name was coined in 1998. The RCMP Project IPANA claimed there are less than 18 victims, but Indigenous organizations don't believe that. Because such a high number of victims were First Nations women, they claim the victim numbers go as high as 40 and that these women were just abducted off the highway. Reasons behind the murders are endless. Some point to poverty and drug abuse, others say they're due to systemic racism, and others claim hitchhikers are targeted because their location is so remote and isolated. Of all the cases, only one has ever been solved. Cody Legibokov killed 3 women and a teenage girl in the Highway of Tears area and was later convicted. But that's the culprit of 4 of those murders? What about the other 36 that still go unsolved? At number 8, we have Christine Jessup. And this one may go down in history as one of Canada's most infamous cold cases. Back in October of 1984, 9-year-old Christine Jessup got dropped by the school bus outside her home in Queensville, Ontario. Christine was alone since her parents were at work at the time, but she somehow disappeared. Her body was found 2 months later in a wooded area more than 50 kilometers away from her home. Autopsy results showed she'd been before being stabbed to death, and in a rush to arrest someone for the horrendous crime, suspicion fell on the Jessup's next-door neighbor, Guy Paul Morin, who was quickly arrested and convicted of Christine's murder. I hate cases like that when you're so in a rush to arrest somebody that you just arrest the first person you think of, which is usually always false. Guy literally had a solid alibi. He was at work and his timestamp even proved it. It was impossible he had kidnapped her, but he was still arrested. It took 11 years for him to be exonerated after an inquiry report said the evidence in the case had been tailored to suit the police's theory of Guy killing her. The police even bullied a witness about her timeline. They even left cigarette butts by the house since Guy was a smoker. All that while, the real killer was still at large. He was reinvestigated and found guilty in 1992, but was finally freed in 1995 when the DNA test proved he wasn't a match. Imagine being in jail for that bloody long, wrongfully. And so many people are. So many people are. Filling at number 7 slot are the babes in the woods. That term is frequently used to describe a case with multiple child victims discovered in the forest, which is exactly what this case is. Back in 1953, the bodies of 2 young boys were found in Stanley Park, Vancouver. The corpses were so badly decomposed that on initial observation, the medical examiner thought one of the victims was a girl. Further examination led the team to conclude that the victims had been dead for 6 years already. It took till 1998 for DNA testing to prove that both victims were in fact boys and brothers, but till this day they've remained unidentified. All officers knew about the case was that they were both killed with a hatchet. One was 10 and the other was 7, and both seemed to be Caucasian. Police started looking for mothers who were missing their children, and they were tipped off about a redhead with 2 kids who had been taken by loggers a few years prior. The case stayed cold till 2018 when detectives decided to use DNA sites like 23andMe and Ancestry to try and identify the boys. Currently though, there is still no identification. Now at number 6 is Dino Bravo. Adolfo Bresciano was an Italian immigrant living in Quebec. His day job was being the professional wrestler Dino Bravo, and I don't know how much you guys know about wrestling because I honestly don't know a lot, but Dino was named Canada's strongest man by the World Wrestling Federation in the 80s, so I mean, huge flex. He ended up retiring in 1992, and less than a year later, in March of 93, his body was found shot to death. Dino was found sitting at home filled with 17 bullets, and no one could figure out who was behind the seemingly random murder. Rumors started floating that the mafia killed Dino for his involvement in a cigarette smuggling ring. Dino was related to Vic Catroni, who was a mobster, and he used his fame to secure connections in the underworld. As he progressed, he became responsible for bigger projects, one of which was a shipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The shipment was apprehended by police, which led to people thinking his death was mob retaliation. Even one of Dino's previous opponents, Bret Hart, said Dino told them he knew his days were numbered. So maybe he was just a hit in the mob's many hits? Who knows? Coming in at number 5 is Kerry Ann Brown. This case is the most infamous case coming out of the province of Manitoba, so let's explore it. 15-year-old Kerry was at a party with her best friend Nicole on the 16th of October 1986. The two were waiting outside the house about to leave when Nicole went inside to grab something she had forgotten. By the time she came back outside, Kerry had disappeared. All Nicole could see was a single set of footprints walking in the snow. The situation freaked her out even more so since Kerry was meant to sleep at her house that night, so what was she going to tell Kerry's parents? Her father reported her missing at 4 p.m. the next day, and less than 40 hours after she was last seen, her dead body was found in a wooded area outside her hometown, Thompson. Autopsy results showed that Kerry had been raped before being killed, and DNA tests concluded that 2 people were involved. A local man was charged with the crime but was let go a few months later due to lack of evidence. Until this day, the case remains unsolved. At number 4 is Kimberly Ann McAndrew. Back in August of 1989, 19-year-old Kimberly McAndrew, a student at Dalhousie University, left her shift at Canadian Tire a few minutes early. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. She had plans that night to go to the Halifax Busker Festival with her family and boyfriend, but obviously she never showed up. A witness reported seeing her buying flowers at Penhorn Moor in Dartmouth, but Tom Martin, the police detective on the case, highly doubted that. See, if you don't know the layout of Halifax, Halifax is here and Dartmouth is like here, and you can either take McDonald Bridge to get there or a ferry. They're not super close, and it's a bit of a mission to get to Dartmouth, and the only reason I know this is because my ex went to Dalhousie and I visited him a lot. Either way, anyone, including Kim, would have never made the trip to Dartmouth considering she had plans that evening. So Martin suspected that whatever happened to her happened in the Canadian Tire parking lot, and I do agree with Martin. To this day, neither her or her body have ever been found. I just don't understand why you'd go to Dartmouth to buy flowers and you can buy flowers in Halifax. Filling at number 3 slot is Lynn Harper. Back in July of 1957, 12-year-old Lynn Harper and her family had relocated to Clinton, Ontario since her dad had recently joined the military. In June of 1959, Lynn went missing near RCAF station and her body was found 2 days later at a farm nearby. Police officers automatically turned to Lynn's 14-year-old school friend Stephen Truscott since he was the last person who saw Lynn alive. That evening, Stephen gave her a ride on his bike from school towards County Road. No one has any idea what took place on that bike ride, but officers assumed that when the two reached Lawson's Bush, Stephen raped and then killed her. According to Stephen, though, he had left her at the intersection of County Road and Highway 8, and the next time he looked back, he saw her getting into some random Chevrolet. Despite his account, he was charged and tried as an adult, first being sentenced to death and then just to life in prison. He was paroled 10 years later and was acquitted of all charges in 2007 after a major miscarriage of justice. Lynn's real abductor and killer remains unknown, but imagine how stupid you have to be to focus all your attention on a 14-year-old boy when there are other viable suspects in Clinton. Now, at number 2 are the Hemlock Valley murders. Back in 1995, the bodies of 3 women were found near the Agassiz Mountains in Vancouver. The victims, Tammy Pipe, Victoria Yanker, and Tracy Olajide, were all prostitutes in their 30s working in downtown Vancouver. So already we know the killer had a preference in who they liked to target. Prostitutes in their 30s. All 3 were assaulted and then murdered before being left near the mountains, and thankfully with this case, officers kind of already knew who the culprit was: Ronald Richard Macaulay. Ronald had a history of assaulting prostitutes and had already served 17 years for 2 rapes and attempted murders. He was imprisoned again shortly after the bodies were found, but there was no way to link him to the crimes. The semen samples from the crime scene were too degraded, but thankfully as forensic technology improved, they were able to test a sample in 2001. It wasn't a match. So after relying on the killer being in jail all those years, the police got a huge wake-up call when they realized the case was still ongoing. I hate cases involving prostitutes because prostitute cases are the ones that police least look into, because I don't know why, maybe they're just a lower demographic of the population, but they are still as important as any part of the population. Look into those cases. And finally, at number 1 is Louis Sam. Back in 1884, an American mob crossed over the border from Nooksack, USA to Abbotsford, Canada, and lynched 14-year-old Sam. The boy was accused of murdering a shopkeeper in Nooksack called James Bell, and when he returned to Abbotsford, his people, the present-day Sumas First Nation people, turned him over to BC authorities because they figured they would know how to deal with the matter. While Sam was awaiting his trial, the angry mob captured him and hanged him from a tree near the border. After investigation, it became extremely clear that Sam did not kill James Bell and that the two men who riled up the mob in the first place were the most likely culprits. 2 BC officers went to Nooksack in disguise to collect information, and they found out that the murderer was most likely William Osterman. William had taken over Bell's business and was the one who brought over Sam, promising him a job, which was a complete lie. His sidekick and brother-in-law David Harkness, who was also sleeping with Bell's wife, was the ringleader of the mob. The two went unconvicted, and a young person of color died for no reason other than the fact he was a person of color. I wanted to make this case number 1 because it hit home with me for some reason, what with the recent murder of George Floyd. I just can't stand another day or hearing about another case where a person of color is killed by a white person for no reason.